I think if I can impart one thing on people would be really to find purpose in the pain.
Yeah.
And also learn to reconcile your life. And it doesn't mean giving up, right? It means letting go and realizing you can't undo what's been done and finding a way to live in your new reality and continuously try to look for moments of joy among the suffering.
Welcome to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast, the show where we shine a light on the hidden impacts of medical trauma, explore tools for healing, and empower you to take control of your health journey. I'm Sarah, your host, a passionate advocate for trauma-informed care, somatic healing, and compassionate conversations. I'll bring you expert insights, healing strategies, and personal stories of resilience to help you feel seen, heard, and supported on your path to recovery. Before we jump into this episode with Shaun, I want to let you know that this podcast is about COVID vaccine injury. It is not a commentary on vaccines, but an opportunity to see what it looks like when we don't listen to people about their experience that they're having in their own body. This is not specific to vaccine injury. I've talked to people with rare diseases who have had the same experience. But because of the political and societal divisions around the COVID vaccine, my guest was shunned, invalidated, and dismissed by both people in the medical community and others. So that's really what this episode is about, the importance of supporting people and believing them. And let's move on and hear Shaun's story. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast. And today I have Shaun Barcavage on. Hi, Shaun.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here. Shaun is a family nurse practitioner who is going to share about his experience with a COVID vaccine injury. Shaun, I gave just a super brief intro about who you are, so feel free to say a little bit more.
Yeah, so being a nurse practitioner is actually a second background for me. Prior to that, I worked in international development for over 15 years. So I lived abroad and I worked in a lot of conflict zones around the world, predominantly in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And when I returned to the United States, I decided to pursue a degree in nursing. I always half of me always wanted to be a doctor. The other half wanted to be a global nomad, and the global nomad won out first. So when I came back to the US, I thought, let's switch gears. Finally, now's my chance. I thought, I'm too old. It's too late to go to medical school. So I chose a nursing pathway and thought I'd go be a nurse practitioner. So then that's how I ended up becoming a nurse practitioner. And I had a side interest in infectious diseases and HIV and hepatitis C. So after I finished school, I went straight in to specialize in that area. And I worked in a federally qualified health center in Harlem for a while, trained there, then went out to San Francisco, worked for a bit for the San Francisco AIDS Foundation and the Department of Public Health. Then returned to New York and ended up working in research in HIV.
Wow. That sounds like you were in some intense positions.
Yeah, it was in a lot. That's an understatement. I think both careers were full of intensity. And I think that's partly just my personality, drawn to things that provide a high stimulus.
Yeah, you move toward versus kind of pulling away.
Right, man. I like adventure. I like things that are stimulating. Attention. Hold my short attention span.
Yeah. Well, before we go a little bit more into what the topic is that we were going to talk about today, just this question that's popping up in my head is, in your training, was medical trauma something that was talked about? Like the trauma that can come from medical experiences?
No, actually, never. I mean, in the nature of medicine is you're faced with oftentimes trauma, right? On
Yeah.
various levels, but I think more specifically in my field of HIV, you encounter much deeper trauma
Mhm.
um, in those circles, or oftentimes a lot of our patients have compounding problems,
Mhm.
in addition to a disease, physical disease process. They also have mental illness problems, or they have addiction problems. So
Mhm.
it's the first time I encountered trauma on trauma on trauma, like
Mhm.
multiple layers of trauma,
Yeah.
but no specific training in how to deal with it. And I think that
Yeah.
that now is more apparent than ever.
How needed it is.
Of it, yes, because of my own. When the tables are turned, when you go from being practitioner to the patient,
Yeah.
your eyes are open to a whole world of problems in medicine.
Yeah, and, I would love for us to kinda go down that path of you, sharing what happened, like, what was the thing that switched you from the provider to the patient?
Yeah, so I was cruising along, nearing the top of my second career as a nurse practitioner, loving my job in research, loving living in New York. I was with my partner, we were both employed, enjoying New York. We were still relatively young. I was super healthy. I had no medical problems whatsoever other than some sciatica,
Mhm,
my lower back. And then, boom, the pandemic hit.
mhm,
And in the United States, one of the unfortunate things about our medical system is that we don't have any kind of national on the ground medical institutions. Yeah, we don't have like a national health service, right? Like in the
yeah,
UK or
right,
in European countries. So when the pandemic hit, the government needed to run trials, clinical drug trials for COVID, right? To try
mhm,
to find ways to treat patients during the pandemic.
mhm,
And one of the national programs that we had in place was the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. And
mhm,
this is sort of like a national network of trial sites at usually at university based hospital systems, but not always. And so it was a very easy system to sort of hijack to
mhm,
roll out these trials across the country. And
mhm,
where I worked was one of those trial sites. So we immediately switched from our regular work in HIV and infectious disease clinical drug trials, put them on pause,
mhm,
and then quickly transitioned to working on trials for COVID, including vaccine trials.
mhm,
So I was working on that. And when the vaccine trials were completed in 6 months, there, was a rapid rollout, as you
mhm,
know,
mhm,
and health workers were one of the first invited to step up and get the vaccine.
mhm,
So, I had probably in the back of my mind, like a lot of people, I probably had some hesitation about it. I knew, especially the mRNA vaccines, they were new. It was kind of a newer platform. These specific COVID vaccines weren't really ever tried prior in humans. They were newly designed for this pandemic, and there were no real long-term safety data in humans. So I knew all of that, but yet still I was, I believe in science. I wanted to do my part.
mhm,
I had to go to work, and then the hospital was going to mandate it. So I stepped up and I got my first dose in late December of 2020.
mm,
And I went to the hospital, and um, I think it was a pharmacist who was there, and he injected me in my right arm, which is my dominant arm, which is very strange. Usually you get vaccines in your non-dominant arm, but the way the chair was positioned, my arm was there, so he just went for it.
Mhm.
And I remember getting the shot and then standing up and feeling off,
Mhm. Mhm.
a little bit lightheaded. I felt, after a minute or so, like a kind of like a tingling and a warm and cold sensation going up and down my arm. I
Mhm.
thought, "Oh, that's weird," and I just kinda didn't give much attention to it, but they made us all everyone sit there for about 10 to 15 minutes after the shot just to make sure
Mhm.
no one had any, like, anaphylactic or acute
Yeah.
reaction. So I was sitting there, and, after about 10 minutes, I kept feeling this weird sensation in my arm. So I told the nurse, and she's like, "Hmm, that's unusual. Why don't you stay another 15 minutes?" And I
Mhm.
stayed, and it didn't really subside, but it didn't really progress. So they're
Mhm.
like, "Okay, you can go home." So I went home. And then over the next 2, 3 days, it kind of spread up my arm, slowly into the right side of my face and my ear, and then also into my right armpit.
Mhm.
And I remember, like, sitting in the chair in my apartment in New York, and I was saying to my partner, I'm like, "Something's just not right. My arm feels weird." And I said, "It feels like I'm sweating out of my armpit, like water's trickling down my arm." And I would touch it, and there's nothing there. It's dry.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then, a couple of, like, probably was, I don't know, 3, 4 days or 5 days into it, I messaged the doctors online, and I had a virtual visit, and they're like, they didn't know what to make of it, so they scheduled me with a neurologist, and I went to see this neurologist at my hospital, and he did some basic blood work, and he did an, uh, an EMG, which is like a test of the nerves on the right arm, and everything looked okay. So he's like, "Well, maybe it's just a transient. Maybe they just hit a nerve, but I still think you should get a second dose. The hospital's going to mandate 2 doses in order for people to return to work, and you don't want to take the risk with COVID." But every bone in my body, every cell in my body was kind of screaming red alert. That's a bad idea. Don't do it. I
Yeah.
don't think you should do this. You had this reaction. Mm, you know, don't mess with. Don't mess anymore with it. And even though my every fiber of my being and my gut instincts were telling me that, the second dose was due in 3 weeks, and like the pressure was mounting, the societal pressure was
Yeah.
mounting,
Yeah.
the fear of return to work, the fear of COVID. It was like epic at that time. It
Yeah.
was mass fear, mass hysteria everywhere, 24/7. The news was intensifying everything. And at that time, I was also following people in the ICU who were very, very sick with COVID. And, those cases were heavy. And that was also weighing on me because I'm seeing the worst of COVID, right? I'm not really seeing the
Right.
full spectrum of like people who just had a sniffle or didn't have any symptoms all day long, all evening. I'm looking at the most critical. So that was also
Right.
scaring me.
And it was really I remember it I don't know if it was at that point, but I just remember from Texas, New
Hmm.
York City was, like, one of the places where it was just hit so hard, and
Hmm.
I heard such, horrible stories of what was happening there, so I can
Hmm.
imagine you're in the midst of that, seeing that, and I think what you're talking about right now, Shaun, is, like, really important for everybody, listening because even when we're talking about, like, anything, right, there are gonna be these times where, like, our body, our intuition is saying, like, "Don't do it," and we have all this pressure
Hmm.
from the outside, and it depends on the situation, obviously, where it's coming from and what the pressure looks like that's gonna feel so like, there are these 2 different things saying, like, "Don't do it. Do it. You need to do it. You're a bad person if you don't do it." And so
Yeah.
I just wanna, like, validate that and acknowledge that, and, like, that is a really hard situation to be put in. And
Right.
and, many of us are gonna go through that in medical settings, but also in other settings. So that's one of the, like, really hard parts of being a human.
Hmm. Yeah, tell me about it. And this is the beginning of my journey into what we were referring to before is layers of trauma. So it was
Yeah.
the trauma of working on COVID, seeing the worst of COVID, the trauma of having an initial reaction and having to make the decision whether or not to get a second dose,
Yeah.
and then not listening to myself and going ahead to get that second dose, which was in my left arm. And then that just set off a cascade of horrific symptoms
Yeah.
from like intense pain through my whole arm into my chest, my back, my neck,
Yeah.
reigniting the neuropathy sensations on my right arm into my eye, going into tachycardia that would go on all night, and chest discomfort, wild blood pressure swings, um, temperature dysregulation, waking up in the middle of the night, freezing and teeth chattering, to like another night waking up soaked in sweat,
Mhm.
to severe insomnia, not being able to sleep and jolting awake every 2 minutes every time my body was trying to go into like a calm mode,
Yeah.
to positional tachycardia where I couldn't stand for more than a few minutes without my legs turning purple and wanting to pass out.
Mm. Mhm.
It just went on to getting electrical shock sensations in my legs, muscle twitches everywhere, so many things. It was like, what's that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah.
It was like that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, not wanting to go seek medical help because you're afraid to go into the hospitals because you think everybody's got COVID and you don't want to get COVID, to thinking it's going to just all subside, to then making the step going to the emergency room, and then starting the trauma of interacting with the medical community
Of
from
which
day one.
you are a part of, or at
Yes.
that time were a part of, and an infectious disease.
Because in my foolish mind, when I went to do the vaccination, I thought, well, I'm doing my part. If something goes wrong, I'm sure because this is all new, the community, everyone will just jump on it to try to figure out what went wrong, right?
Yeah.
And there'd be a lot of help for you. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
And it was like the biggest wake up call of my life.
Yeah.
It started with my first ER trip in Pennsylvania when I went to see my sick mother sick
Mm.
myself.
Yeah.
And I was said to my partner, like, I have to go. I don't feel well. And I took my blood pressure and it was crazy. It was like 200 over like 130, 140. I'm like, I never had high blood pressure before in my life. My head was pounding. I started getting tinnitus in my right ear that
Mhm.
was screeching, severe headache, tachycardia, chest pain. I go to the ER and I said, I think I'm having a reaction to the vaccine. I had a small reaction to the first dose, and the ER doctor just blanketly dismissing me. He ran me through a CT scan because I said also my stomach was in severe pain.
Mhm.
And he's like, he came back after the scan. He's like, your mesentery is inflamed. And I'm like, oh, that's not good, right? And he's like, maybe you just have a viral infection. And then I'm like, infectious disease. So I'm thinking, I had a reaction to the first dose. The second dose and immediately spiked this cascade,
Mhm.
crazy symptoms, right? And he's telling me maybe I have a stomach bug. And
Mm.
I'm like, I have tinnitus, I have new tachycardia, I have chest pain, I have blood pressure swings, I have sleep jolts, I have fasciculations, and you're telling me I have a stomach. I'm like, I don't know any virus like that, right? But
Yeah.
in my mind, I was like, it's clear that I had this shot, and within minutes I had a reaction. I had a second shot, and within minutes to days I had an intense reaction. But like, he was dismissing any of that evidence and then just sending me home.
Yeah, I wanna pause here, Shaun, because I think what you just said is, um, an experience not specific to the COVID vaccine. response or injury. But that feeling of showing up for help and
Mhm.
having this expectation that you're going to be like welcomed in, like, yes, let me help you.
Mhm.
And instead, not being believed and being dismissed. This is one of the most common things that I hear from people who have talked to me about medical trauma is this feeling of being dismissed. And then, like, Shaun, I'm thinking about, wow, you're coming in here as somebody as who is part of the medical world as a nurse practitioner, having had so much experience in researching and like clinical experience in infectious disease. And even with that background, still being dismissed. And I don't know if this is true, but it almost feels like it would just be like
Mhm.
double
Right. I
double
mean,
impact own people kind of like,
because the craziness of it is that oftentimes because you're in medicine, right? So you
yeah,
think like, oh, I can really explain all this very well because I'm medical minded, right? So let me just
yeah,
run this through with you. But that also hurts you because the doctors look at you like, oh, you're a nurse practitioner. You probably just think you know too much, and they get
mm,
become dismissive by your knowledge.
yeah,
And so I think there's an element of that like maybe you're just because of all your knowledge, maybe you're just reading too much into your symptoms, and
mm,
you're kind of over exaggerating everything.
mm,
Mind you, I'm like, I've never gone much to the doctor for much of anything until
yeah.
this moment, and here I am being kind of dismissed, and with all deference to the ER, I get it, like, they're an emergency place where really they're like, "What's your main issue?" Right? But I wasn't that case. I had, like, a whole cascade of things going on, and I think he just didn't know what to do.
Okay. That piece, I think he didn't know what to do. And I know this has happened to people who with long COVID as well. Of when you encounter somebody who doesn't know what to do for whatever reason, that can switch on this kind of, the nervous system gets scared, right? That person's nervous system gets activated. And when somebody's nervous system gets activated, they're going into like fight, flight, or shut down, but I think probably most commonly we're seeing people in this situation go into fight or flight, and that's not where we're going to get the kind of connection that we need when we're like, I am sick. I am in pain. I don't know what's going on. I have all these different things going on. I have heard multiple people who've had the experience of long COVID talk about this, trying to find somebody who can help them. And in trying to do that, being dismissed because of people that don't understand it and can't help them are like, no, I don't. Sometimes acting like what is happening isn't really happening, like it is in your head or
Mm.
it's not a big deal or whatever.
But
Yeah.
it's also, I think, part of the problem is the way the medical system has evolved nowadays, right?
Mhm.
Everything is protocol driven and evidence-based practice. So, everything is like, what's your cardiovascular risk? What's
Mm.
your metabolic situation? Like everybody wants to plug you into these boxes. And so if you're the patient that arrives with some complexity that
Yeah.
doesn't fit into one of these neat protocols, everybody is just like frozen like deer in the head, like, what do I do with this, right? And then it requires a lot of extra work, those patients, and the system doesn't have time allotted for doctors to treat you, so they're just like, yeah, this is too much for me, sorry, bye.
Right, and that response can be so different depending on the person that you're talking to, depending on their nervous system and their how they operate in the world.
Yeah, I think that was just like the beginning, right? And then what progressed from there was just endless medical trauma, from gaslighting to neglect, abandonment, indifference, to blatantly misdiagnosing you as anxiety. I remember I was having all those cardiac symptoms, right? So, and I went to the cardiologist at my hospital, and I tried to explain to her what I was feeling, and she was right away like, "Oh, she ran an EKG and it came back normal." But she's like, "Mate, are you sure you're not just anxious?" And then I just sink inside. I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
God, not the anxiety card." It's so um demeaning to me, right? Like, I'm a medical professional, like, I don't know the difference between my symptoms and my and
Yeah.
so then I knew in my mind something clicked, and I thought, "Oh, this is gonna be very hard because this is so unusual. I need objective evidence because just the subjective of saying, 'Oh, I'm feeling this,' or 'I'm feeling that,' it wasn't good enough." And so I went home and I started to record my symptoms. I literally took videos of me sitting and my heart rate, and then standing up and walking to the fridge, and my heart rate going from 55 to 155, 160.
Yeah.
And then I took pictures of my legs turning purple. And then I went back to her and I said, "Here, can you look at this?" And she's like, "Oh, I think that you might have POTS." And I'm like, "Oh, you think?" I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't know what kind, yesterday it was anxiety, and I'm like, I don't really know what kind of anxiety behaves like this.
Right.
Yeah, I missed that in the textbook. So I was like, really, I didn't say it like that to her. I was very respectful, but in my mind, I was like thinking like that.
And so during this time that, like, all of these different things are going on, you're still going back to work?
I was working from home, and then a couple of times I tried to go into work, but I couldn't function because I
Yeah.
couldn't stand. Like every time I was standing to like see a patient or exam, my heart was just pounding in my chest and I felt
Yeah.
sick and lightheaded and my ear was screaming
Yeah.
and I wasn't sleeping from these whatever sleep jolts. So I was sleep deprived. It was like impossible. I looked a mess at work. I was run down like I was a zombie.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to hurt myself or hurt a patient. I can't be here. So my body was just like shutting down.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering that because I know that, like, working as a medical provider is intense, demanding work. And when you're feeling like this, it's kind of impossible to continue to go about your day to day life. I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast know the feeling of chronic illness or something that you're working through where it's like, my day to day life isn't going to be able to go on as it has. And some people are able to get back to it. Some people's lives are forever changed, and so that's what I was, really thinking about when you were talking about what you were dealing with in your body. And then, a lot of what I think about too is the mental and that emotional impact of all of these things happening in your body, first of all, which
Mhm.
is scary,
Mhm.
period, for anyone. It's scary to have these things happen and not know what's going on. But then for your life to shift so significantly that work as you knew it was
Mhm.
not a possibility at that point.
No, so there was another layer of trauma that I was seeing my career slip away from me, my health
Mm.
slip away, and then I was feeling this abandonment from the medical system that I thought would be there for me if
Yeah,
something went wrong. And then there's the trauma of, vaccine injury being so taboo that
yeah,
it's no one wants to talk about it, no one wants to touch it. If you raise it, you can be labeled an anti-vaxxer or something, or misinformation. And I was none of that. I was like deeply rooted in science, working for a
yeah.
prestigious medical institution, working on the vaccine trials. So I
Well,
was,
and this one in particular, of
mm,
all the vaccines,
mhm,
this one became so political.
right.
So it was just like a storm that you stepped into unknowingly.
Yeah. And then woke up to a nightmare.
Yeah. Oh,
And
man.
I mean, the medical trauma just continued throughout the whole. I mean, I remember because I was going from doctor to doctor. I was going to the cardiologist. I was going to like the ENT, the ear doctor for my tinnitus. I was going to a neurologist for like the neuropathy sensations I was having. And I remember going to one ENT because the tinnitus was so debilitating, right? It's one of
Mhm.
the first symptoms because it's a sound trapped in your brain that you can never escape from.
Yeah.
And I was explaining to him that it started after the vaccine, and he just looked at me and he's like, "Well, you know, people can just get sudden hearing loss coincidentally and just to wake up and they have tinnitus."
Mm,
Right? So he was just like dismissing me and
mm.
my medical knowledge and my life experience.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can we just like let's think this through methodically, right? Like I got a vaccine on my right arm. I
Mm,
had symptoms up and down my right arm that went into my face and my eye, and my ear turned hot red, and then I developed tinnitus.
yeah.
So are we going to just dismiss all of that and just go with it's coincidence? I'm
Right.
like, well, who's anti-science? You know? I'm like,
Right.
what are you talking about here? You
Yeah.
know, we're both medical professionals. This is the evidence of
Yeah.
what happened to me, but let's just go with the irrational lack of evidence and say it was coincidence. I mean, I left crying. I literally left and I sobbed outside the office because he's like, well, neither here nor there. There's nothing we can do. Here's a list of things you can try at home. Just learn to live with it,
Mm,
quote unquote. Very
yeah.
cruel.
Yeah. Very, yeah, very cruel. And, um, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would sit outside and sob after that. And just after like
And
the
I'm a
time
50
after
some,
time after time of being dismissed and not listened to and not believed. And that feeling of not being believed about what you are experiencing in your own body.
right.
That's something that always astounds me is not believing someone.
Yeah, especially when you think you're a medical professional, right? So I know how to articulate my symptoms and
Yeah.
time frames, and so you think that that's a going to be helpful, and in fact, it's hurtful because they think you're over embellishing or exaggerating, you know,
Mhm.
um, and then to be just dismissed. Yeah, your experience is just dismissed,
Yeah.
and this was a real wake up call for me for how the state of medicine
Yeah.
and for patients with chronic illnesses or unexplained symptoms
Yes.
or vaccine injury or whatever it is,
Yeah.
this is this seems to be a common thread that's disturbing.
Yes. It is. I mean, I have heard so many stories that are very similar to what you're talking about. Yeah, rare disease, the number of years that people go from doctor to doctor trying to find out what is wrong and being dismissed and not being believed and having what you're going through minimized. It is incredibly traumatic. Like, it absolutely deserves a strong word like trauma because of what it does to somebody. Because this is, I think, medical trauma is different than other traumas, right? There are so many layers. You've already talked a little bit about, well, that's another layer to it. And I think that these things that you're talking about are such common pieces that create the layers of medical trauma. There is absolutely, yes, there is trauma when someone has a heart attack, right? There some of that trauma we cannot minimize or we can't prevent, I should say. Some traumas like that, these quick life or death traumas, we can't prevent that being a traumatic situation for somebody. But I cannot tell you how many times I have heard people's stories of traumas that were absolutely preventable because there are these relational traumas of somebody going in a vulnerable state for help where they feel horrible, they're scared, when we don't feel well, it's hard to show up, it's hard to engage with other people, and we walk into these places expecting care, and when we're met with dismissal, it's just heartbreaking
Right.
to experience that, and then to experience it over and over again when you're just trying to get help. So, Shaun, what I'm curious about too is like you went through this really, really challenging experience physically, emotionally, but today you're advocating for people, you're sharing your story. And so I'm curious about what that journey looked like to begin the process of healing, recovering, what word do you use for it?
I mean, I think well, first I should just highlight that, that trauma, that multi-layered trauma was so, I mean, you have the trauma of your disease that you're
Mhm.
experiencing, right? That you went from a healthy person to now your whole world is collapsing and your life
Yes.
being taken away, and your symptoms are scary,
Yeah.
and you're worried if you're going to die, and no one can give you any answers. So it threw me into like a darkness, right? When
Mm.
I started to get gaslit and dismissed by the medical system, you go into a dark state of mind of
Yeah.
hopelessness and despair because you're
Yes.
like, I'm not going to get the help that I need. But something inside me was like, I'm not giving up.
Mhm.
Right? So even in all my rage and my anger and my endless sobbing
Yeah.
for almost 2 years of crying constantly, I wouldn't give up hope of getting help, and
Mm.
I went into, like, advocacy mode,
Mhm.
almost to my own detriment because I was sick trying to help myself
Mhm.
get better and help others, but
Mhm.
you're kinda, like, constantly re-traumatizing yourself, right? Because you're advocating for your illness while you're sick, reminding yourself that you're sick and you're living a sick life.
Yeah, and I can imagine hearing other people's stories could also be triggering as well while
Yeah.
you're still in it.
Yes, because some people were not coping, right? Especially
Yeah.
with tinnitus, and some people had committed suicide, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Is that going to be me?"
Right.
Because that's the path, right? To answer your question, some people in that medical trauma of dismissal and denial, well, you have 2 paths you can go. You can
Yeah.
go into the deep despair and hopelessness, or you can go into the fight mode, and I sort of split the difference and went fight with despair,
Yeah.
for lack of a better, and I wouldn't give up. I was like a dog with a bone,
Yeah.
and, yeah, I mean, it went on for, I would say, I suffered immensely mentally and physically, it well into 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think at a certain point, I had to reconcile with everything, with my
Mhm.
decision to get the second dose, with the way the medical system treated me, with all the trauma, with the loss of my career, with having to get disability, and learn to live
Yeah.
again with the new me.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I attribute it a lot to some people I met along the way who taught me to, like, constantly look for the joy, even when things are dark, look for, like, a speck of light,
Yeah.
focus on that. And I think, a realization that, like, no one was really coming to my rescue, and it was up to me to help myself.
Yeah.
So I think, it was a combination of a lot of that. I mean, I'm nowhere near what could be considered healthy. I suffer still with cardiac symptoms and the tinnitus. but I managed to move mountains in the medical system to try to get treatments to help
Mhm.
and find the one doctor who would believe me. And I remember that experience of a young resident in Manhattan. Well, first, actually, the first experience of a young neurologist who also had a mild reaction to the vaccine, and she
Mm,
believed me,
yes.
finally would do the full workup. And that was like I remember crying and breaking down in her office
Mhm.
with such gratitude
Mhm.
that I think it shocked her because I'm a 50-some-year-old male, right? And now I'm just, like, crying at the drop of a pin of a hat, and then meeting this, young neurologist resident who also I cried about my tinnitus in his office. I just melted down, and I said, You have to help me."
Yeah.
I and he helped me, and that was a moment of big relief, and I think it takes one person like that,
Mm,
right? And they're far too few in the medical system, people willing to take a risk.
yeah.
So
Yeah. When you talked about finding the doctor, and it sounds like you found 2 at that point that listened and believed you, and when you talked about breaking down and crying with gratitude, I could feel that. I think that I would have done the same thing after
mhm.
searching and searching and being dismissed and then finding the person who's like, "Yeah, I believe you."
Yeah. I mean, because in between all of that was endless running around to doctors who either didn't believe me or dismissed me or didn't know what to do
Yeah.
or wanted to mislabel me as something else. And that's the unique nature of, like, vaccine injury. It's another next level of trauma than any other disease because
Mhm.
it's so taboo, right?
Mhm.
It threatens people's beliefs
Mhm.
in the narrative that vaccines are benign. It
Mhm.
threatens the public health and safety. You're seen as a threat, right? At
Mhm.
stimulating vaccine hesitancy. So there's all that up
Yeah.
against you. It's like a wall that's impenetrable. And somewhere in whatever happened over the years, the medical system lost compassion, and a sense um, of the uncomfortable parts of science, right?
Yeah.
Because every drug has a reaction.
Right.
It has the potential to have a reaction or side effects or adverse effects. But with this one, it's taboo. You can't talk about it. You can't acknowledge it. You
Yeah.
can't, you know, like I was trying to explain, like if I gave you penicillin for strep throat and you called me a couple of days later and said, "Hey, I feel sick and I have a rash and I'm having these weird symptoms," and I'm not going to say, "Oh, it's coincidence," right?
Right. Just
You're
keep
gonna
taking it.
you're gonna think it's the first question doctors ask is, "Have you taken anything new? Have you done anything different?" Right?
Right.
Like, if you have a rash, have you used any new laundry detergents? Have you traveled anywhere? You're, like, looking. And with me, when I say my symptoms started with the vaccine, it's the opposite.
Mm,
You dismiss the vaccine and you start looking for other things that it
yeah.
could be other than the thing that it most likely was, right?
Right.
And that's a shock. So it's like you're up against that battle, and I think that lack of acknowledgement of the realities of science and the lack of transparency is more a driver of vaccine hesitancy than if people just were like, treat it like everything else. Yes, there will be reactions, and we need to take care of these people and
Yeah.
investigate them and help them.
Yes.
Would spare so much trauma.
Absolutely. And I think that is so important. And I do remember when the vaccine was coming out and there were people that are like, "You need to take this vaccine." And I'm like, wait, Ye and there were people who weren't scientists either, just, like, saying, like, "Oh, everybody has to take this vaccine," and it was like, Well, let's be honest about what the risks and the benefits are of this. And so I personally, when somebody is really gung ho about something and doesn't want it to be questioned, I'm like,
Mhm.
ooh, that's
Yeah,
what
a
we
red
need to
flag.
question that a little bit. Yeah, it is absolutely a red flag. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I remember myself, I couldn't decide what to do because I was like, this doesn't have a lot of years of research and testing for us to know how safe it is. But I spoke to somebody who was an ER doctor that I knew, and what he said, and it's very similar to what you said, is he said, I I don't know for sure what it's gonna look like 10 years down the road, right? Like I don't know what could happen from this vaccine, but he was seeing how sick people were getting from COVID and he was seeing people die. And so he said, that's why I took the vaccine. And so hearing somebody give me that the information, like acknowledging kind of the nuance, right? It's not just this or just this, was like, okay, thank you. That's the kind of information that's going to make me feel comfortable making like an informed decision that feels like it's my decision
Right.
versus this is what everybody's doing, and if you don't do this, you're a jerk. Basically,
Yeah.
was I remember that, and for you, you couldn't have gone back to work without it.
Right. And that's when I learned the trauma of like being mandated to take something without having robust safety nets in place to
Yeah.
really care for people who would get harmed.
Right.
Right. And because there were those lack of safety nets, the default was just denial and dismissal and
Right. Yeah.
pretend we would just fade away or die.
Yeah.
And that's why when I discuss this, I always have to be on guard because as soon as you talk about this and the trauma you feel, people will want, because of the polarization, people will just say, "Oh, he's talking about vaccine adverse effects, anti-vaxxer."
Mm,
Right?
mm,
It's like quick to just brush stroke it away and pretend, but it's not about that. I always say this isn't about whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. This is about the harsh reality of science, the uncomfortable part of science, and it's a
mm.
kindness issue and a
Yeah.
ethical issue, right? Like
Yeah.
people will get harmed, and you need to help those people.
Yeah. And
Because they just added more suffering unnecessary to all of us that didn't need to be, more trauma that could have been avoided.
right, right. And I think that's a big part of why informed consent in medicine in general is so important because we need to know what we're stepping into. We need to know what the benefits are, the potential side effects,
Right.
because we can't make an educated choice
Mhm.
without having all of that information. And like you said, I mean, the ads, the pharmaceutical ads that are on all the like the commercials are just overwhelming. They talk about all the potential side effects. Like, they're required to talk about all the potential side
But
effects.
not with these pharmaceutical products.
Yeah, that was exactly my
It was just marketed as safe and effective. There was no asterisk, but you cannot sue if harmed, but there's a broken compensation system that will likely not compensate you. But there was none of those. Like the public
yeah,
wasn't. And for me, I like it's a harsh reality, right? But for most people, if you explain that to them and this didn't happen to them, then it's sort of meaningless, right? They don't
yeah,
feel it. They're
yeah.
like, well, for them, if it didn't happen to them, it didn't happen, right?
Right, but
And
then
so
you
you can talk about all this till you're blue in the face, but they don't really feel it like me. I feel the
yeah,
full impact of all the um, failures of the system
yeah,
that were in
yeah,
place, right? And I can't advocate for it because no one will put me on TV to
yeah,
talk about it, right? What other topic can you think of in the country that media will not investigate or discuss, right?
right,
No one will touch it. I
yeah,
begged it took me 2 years to get the New York Times to write an article about it. And in one stroke of the pen, they sort of minimized what happened to me, and then with another stroke of the pen, they wrote a parallel article to dismiss us as rare, right?
Mhm.
So in what other illness do you feel the need to minimize people's suffering as rare,
Right.
right? Like what we say, because if you have somebody that got a rare cancer, we just say, "Oh well, it's rare. Sorry, it's rare." Like
Yeah.
you just don't do that to sick people.
Yeah.
Like I got severely injured by the vaccine. Full stop. Who
Right.
cares if it's rare or not, right? I was
Yeah.
injured. I need acknowledgement and I need help.
Yeah, you need care. You need care.
But they feel the need to question it, right? I had medical professionals who commented on the article that I probably had this or that, and it was anything but that, and they never saw me or met me or knew what I felt from the moment the needle hit my arm,
Yeah.
right? They were just armchair refereeing my situation without having met me.
Yeah. Oh gosh. The what I'm curious about is, so, like, you met those 2 doctors. Finally, you found 2 doctors who were, validating and believed you, and one of them had experienced some, symptoms themselves after the vaccine. What was it like after that? Were you able to find more doctors after that? Or what did recovery look like from there? And, you talked about the neurologist finally being able to get one to do, like, a full workup.
Mhm.
What came from there? Once you were able to do that, were you able to get more care?
Well, I was able to get people at NIH to talk to my doctors and talk
Mhm,
about what other cases they were seeing that were similar to mine and make recommendations on treatment.
mhm.
So that helped immensely.
Yeah,
But not everybody else had that advantage, right?
yeah,
I was pushing the system because it was the only way I could get it to work for me. So that was one avenue, but I also wrote letters to like a top nerve specialist in the country who also believed me and was also working with NIH on similar cases to mine.
okay, yeah.
And so she recommended a neurologist to me. But the problem with the medical system is that if you have like this undefinable kind of like a syndrome, we call
Mhm,
it's very hard to get treatments for that, right?
mhm.
Because then that's when the medical system collides with the trauma of the insurance industry,
Oh,
which is a
yes.
whole other, you talk about medical trauma, then you go into it, medical insurance trauma.
Oh,
And so insurance doesn't want to cover any expensive treatments for things that the FDA says aren't indicated for that condition.
yeah,
Right. So then there is like a conundrum there, a little bit of a paradox that, but luckily there was some literature and foundation for my conditions that warranted getting those treatments. So then my insurance covered the treatments,
wow.
some of which were very helpful and some of them which were marginally helpful. But I think without that, I would be much, much worse than I am today.
Yeah.
So,
Something else I'm curious about along with, like, those treatments is how were you getting supported around your mental health? Because this kind of situation, like you've already talked about, like, depths of darkness and despair. W did you have, like, a supportive community?
no, I didn't. It was me and my partner, and that was about it.
Wow.
My support system, like, my family was kind of like, not really fully there,
Yeah,
for me, and friends kind of, like, faded. I think when you get sick like that, you wake up in another world, and I think you feel very alone.
yeah,
And it was also the pandemic, so it wasn't easy for people to reach out,
yeah,
right? Like if if it were normal times. So I think there was that trauma, feeling alone.
Yeah.
Um, the dark, I mean, I can't express just the darkness of where I was,
Hmm.
how much despair. I was so broken.
Yeah.
And the mental part was heavy. And I think what helped me a little bit is early on, I took a psychiatrist because the tinnitus was so debilitating.
Hmm.
It's still debilitating. I shouldn't talk about it in the past, but it was very debilitating. And I took a psychiatrist early on,
Yeah.
and she also believed me
Yeah.
and was there for me. Um, through the whole thing. I mean, I broke down in tears many times to her in the very early days of this,
Yeah.
and I stayed with her for almost 3 years through this. So that was key.
Yeah. I can imagine. My goodness, especially when you didn't have a support system. You had your partner, and that's
Mhm,
obviously really important to have that. But yeah, finding a professional who can help you through the darkest moments of your life is crucial.
mhm.
And then did you create a group? Did you create an ad?
Early on, I created a Facebook support group for people with the tinnitus and hearing loss after the COVID vaccination,
Yeah,
and that reached about 5,000 members at one
yeah.
point, and that gave me purpose, right?
Mhm,
I think one thing is you have the pain and the suffering, but you have to find a way to turn that pain into purpose.
mhm.
And that helped me a lot because one, I felt like I wasn't alone. And two, I felt like I wasn't just sitting down and accepting my fate,
Yeah,
and that I could join forces with other people and share information and share knowledge, right? And I think that's very common in these illnesses that face a lot of medical trauma. If
mhm.
support groups become a place where you're your own resource, medical resource, right? You're not only sort of like emotional support, but you also start to become a medical resource where you're sharing information and knowledge about doctors and your treatments. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah. I think, I think I've shared with you that I have a support group, and it's within a community called the Befriend Your Body community, all about like reconnecting with your body and like rebuilding that relationship after going through medical trauma. And I think a lot of the benefit of being in a support group like that is you're believed.
yeah.
And that sounds so simple, like, to walk into a place after not being believed and being invalidated, like, to walk into a place where people are like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I get that. I believe you. It makes a lot of sense that you would feel this way." To
Right,
me, there's so much power in that.
right. And it's not only the belief, but it's also like validating because you're interfacing with people who describe the same onset of symptoms as you,
Mhm.
right? So you're not crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like the same tinnitus, the same neuropathy, the same positional tachycardia, the same fasciculations and electrical zaps. Like I wasn't the only one. There were others that are saying the exact same thing as me.
Yes,
So it
yes.
validates you and you're like, "No, I'm not crazy. It's real because here's like thousands of others with exactly the same story as me."
Right, and I think too, you also wouldn't have felt crazy if you hadn't been told over and over and over that what you were saying was, like, just anxiety or,
Mhm,
that can't possibly be happening. It's like, imagine if when you first started feeling that, you were embraced by the whoever you went to see for medical care and was like, "Oh,
mhm.
wow, that sounds really hard.
Right,
Let's take this one piece at a time. What can we do to help you?" So that feeling of being crazy, I don't think is the first reaction when you're going through this. It's almost like you're kind of dismissed so much that you start to think, Am I crazy? Do I have to prove everything?" And that's something I was thinking earlier when you talked about going home and doing videos and taking pictures. And I'm like, you should not have had to do that. You should not have had to prove what you were saying. But I know that you're not alone in that. Like, I know that I've talked to other people it's
Right.
like you feel like you have to prove that what you're feeling is real.
Right.
And in the midst of what you were going through and the pain and the change, all of it, like, to have to prove it just makes it harder.
The biggest shift that could happen in the medical world is that if doctors could just learn that even if they don't know what's going on with a patient and they might not have a cure, is to at least acknowledge the patient
Right.
and say, look, I might not know what's happening. This is new for me, but maybe we can just try to work together and see
Yes.
what we can figure out. And I may not have the answer.
Yeah.
That's so much better than just being dismissed and saying,
Yeah.
you know, you're crazy or your anxiety or I can't help you,
Right.
or I don't believe you.
Yeah. The things that you've also shared, as we kind of talked about what your recovery has been like, is, purpose. I'm thinking about this for people who are in their darkness right now, right? And you talked about purpose, trying to find purpose in the pain. You talked about trying to find joy. So even in the absolute darkness, you can find that little tiny pinprick of light. And it's really interesting because I just released an episode where the woman I was speaking to said the same exact thing about finding that little sliver of light because it is there.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, we talked about support. So, purpose, joy, support, hope, finding a little bit of hope, finding that little tiny bit of light. And I'm curious if there's anything else that you think is important for people
There's a
in
lot.
darkness.
There's like not feeding into your symptoms,
Hmm.
right? You have to transcend your symptoms. Like even in my worst days, I you can't give it energy, right? It's already there, and somehow you have to mentally rise above it and
Hmm.
do what you can, right? Within reason, right? And that's
Yeah.
the key for me. Like I could sit in my chair all day and focus on the sound inside my head and drive myself absolutely crazy, or
Hmm.
I could get up and try to do something, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not that I can no longer read a book or in silence or in peace or or watch a movie or a TV, I can take a walk in nature where there's sounds to distract me. Or even if I can't take a long walk, I can just sit outside when the crickets are there, right?
Yeah.
Look at the trees and the flowers. There's like little things that you can do to distract from the symptoms and don't give them the 24-hour attention that they're trying to command from you.
Hmm.
And so that was a big help. And then I think what was very helpful for me was realizing that support groups are key.
Hmm.
They have a double-edged sword, so they can also be dangerous if you give them too much time and energy.
Hmm.
Is you can have a chronic illness, but you don't have to live a chronic illness life 24/7.
Yeah.
You have to compartmentalize. And at one point, I was very much the 24/7 chronic illness person,
Mm. Hmm.
and I had to pull back. And the other key thing about support groups is that they're only as good as how they're managed, because support groups can go from support to commiserating very fast.
Hmm.
And I think once a support group becomes about commiserating and it goes down into a negative rabbit hole, it's no longer supportive. So
Yes.
support groups need to be uplifting
Yes.
also. As much as being there for people during the hard times, they have to be constantly focused on elements of positivity.
Yes, I feel like this focus of recovery is such an important component of it. Not that anybody's invalidated or, you're not able to feel how you feel, but I think that without the focus on where you want to go and this focus of recovery, it can feel really dark and hopeless.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, I think about support groups is like it's not a bad thing to be able to laugh in your support group. That's good. You want to find a place where you can be with people who can talk about other things, like where you can just show up and be some humans together that
Right.
have been through some similar experiences, but you can also laugh about,
Right.
something that happened at your Thanksgiving dinner and share that with a group because you're just showing up as to
Mhm.
me humans who are more authentic because of what you've been through. Because I will say that, no, I don't wish anybody to go through medical trauma or anybody to go through trauma, but I do think that part of the growth through experiencing that and moving through it and processing it and recovering is that there's an authenticity
Right.
that comes. And I feel that with people. Like, I will meet somebody and I will know you've been through some shit. Like, I feel
Right.
it because I have been there too. And yeah, so I agree with you. There were some support groups I joined in Facebook that were medical trauma support groups. And I very, very quickly left those
Mhm.
groups because it felt like this like gravity pulling down of like negative loops. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
I know
and it's because
exactly.
I have friends in the same situation, and some of them are still stuck in the full-time chronic illness mode, and they're just
Yeah.
constantly from the minute they wake up, they're on X or social media, looking and scanning all the groups, hoping to find answers that they may not
Yeah.
have seen, like looking constantly for things. And I think if you don't compartmentalize, you're also losing time, right?
Life. You're losing life.
Losing life.
Yeah.
Mm, for me, that was important. Like, and it's easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. Like, the recipe isn't something it's not like baking a cake, right?
Right.
It's not going to come out perfect. I could easily slip back if
Yeah.
if I let myself go there, but I try so hard to compartmentalize now,
Yeah.
and I've been
Yeah.
better and better at it.
I do want to just close it as I normally do by asking you if there's one thing you want to leave the audience with.
Most I think if I can impart one thing on people would be really to find purpose in the pain and also learn to reconcile your life. And it doesn't mean giving up, right? It means letting go and
Mm,
realizing you can't undo what's been done and finding a way to live in your new reality and continuously try to look for moments of joy among the
yeah.
suffering.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to end this episode is to look for moments of joy, even amidst the suffering. Shaun, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. And I think a lot of people are going to resonate with what you shared today, whether they have also had the experience of the COVID vaccine injury or have experienced long COVID or have been searching for help around rare disease. So I'm really thankful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Mhm. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow or subscribe to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast. It really helps more people find these stories and know that they're not alone. And if you're looking for a place to connect with others who understand what it's like to live with and heal from medical trauma, I invite you to check out the Befriend Your Body community. It's a supportive space where we explore somatic practices, nervous system education, and peer connection to help you feel safe in your body again. You can learn more and join us at medicaltraumasupport.com. Thank you for listening.